The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Convent in rural Massachusetts, casting colorful patterns across the worn wooden floors that had witnessed decades of silent prayer and devotion. Mother Superior Agatha Whitmore stood before the assembled sisters, her weathered hands clasped behind her back as she addressed the small community that had been her life's work for over 3 decades. The autumn of 1887 had brought with it an unusual sense of anticipation, as if the very walls of the ancient building were holding their breath for something momentous to occur. "Sisters," she began, her voice carrying the authority that had guided the convent through countless seasons of prayer and service, through harsh winters when food was scarce and blazing, summers when the stone walls provided blessed coolness. Today marks the 50th anniversary of our founding. Father McKenna has suggested we commemorate this milestone with a photograph, something to preserve our community for future generations who may wonder what manner of women devoted their lives to God's service in this remote corner of New England. The suggestion was met with a mixture of excitement and nervous murmurs among the 23 nuns gathered in the chapel. Photography was still a relatively new and somewhat mysterious art in 1887, and many of the sisters had never posed for a formal portrait. The very idea of capturing one's image seemed almost magical, a way of stopping time itself and preserving a moment for eternity. Sister Bernadette, the youngest of their order at barely 19, clasped her hands together in anticipation, her eyes bright with curiosity about the modern world beyond their cloistered walls. Meanwhile, the elder sisters exchanged uncertain glances, some wondering if such vanity was appropriate for women who had renounced worldly concerns. "The photographer, Mr. Edmund Hartwell, comes highly recommended from Boston," Mother Superior continued, noting the varied expressions on her sisters' faces. "He has photographed several religious communities throughout New England and understands the sacred nature of our calling. Father McKenna assures me that Mr. Hartwell is a gentleman of impeccable character who will treat our community with the respect and dignity befitting our vows. We shall gather in the courtyard after morning prayers tomorrow, weather permitting." As the sisters dispersed to their daily duties, none could have imagined that this simple commemorative photograph would become the center of a mystery that would perplex historians, theologians, and paranormal investigators for more than a century to come. The convent had always been a place of quiet miracles, small answered prayers, and the gentle presence of divine grace, but nothing had prepared them for what was about to unfold. Sister Bernadette made her way to the kitchen where she assisted Sister Mary Catherine with the preparation of the evening meal. The young nun's mind was filled with questions about the photography process, having heard tales of the new invention from her brother who worked in Boston before she had taken her vows. "Sister Mary Catherine," she ventured as they peeled potatoes for the simple stew that would feed the community, "have you ever seen a photograph before?" The older nun, a woman of 45 who had joined the convent after being widowed young, smiled at the question. "Once, child, my late husband had his portrait taken shortly before he passed. It was a remarkable thing, seeing his face captured so perfectly on paper, almost like looking through a window into the past." Her expression grew thoughtful. "Though I must admit, there was something unsettling about it as well, as if a piece of his soul had been trapped within that image." Sister Bernadette considered this as she worked, her young mind struggling to understand how light and shadow could be permanently fixed upon paper. The concept seemed to border on the miraculous, and she wondered if God approved of such endeavors. Surely, if he had not intended for human images to be captured, he would not have given men the knowledge to create such devices. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn leaves creating a golden carpet across the convent grounds. The ancient oak trees that surrounded the property stood like silent sentinels, their branches nearly bare after the recent winds that had swept through the valley. Mr. Edmund Hartwell arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, his assistant helping him transport the large camera equipment through the wrought iron gates that had protected the convent for half a century. He was a thin, serious man, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the precise manner of someone accustomed to technical work requiring absolute attention to detail. "Good morning, Mother Superior," he said, tipping his hat respectfully as he surveyed the courtyard with a professional eye. "I trust we have adequate lighting for our purposes. The morning sun should provide excellent illumination for the exposure. though we must be mindful of shadows that might obscure the faces of your sisters." Mother Superior Agatha nodded, gesturing toward the stone courtyard where the sisters had already begun to assemble. The space had been carefully swept and prepared for the occasion, with the ancient stone fountain serving as a natural backdrop. "We are at your disposal, Mr. Hartwell." The sisters are quite excited about this historic moment, though I confess some are more nervous than others about the process. As Hartwell set up his equipment with methodical precision, positioning the large camera on its wooden tripod and adjusting the brass fittings with practiced hands, the nuns arranged themselves according to his careful directions. The photographer moved among them, like a conductor arranging an orchestra, ensuring that each face would be clearly visible in the final image. The taller sisters stood in the back row, their black habits creating a striking silhouette against the grey stone walls, while the shorter ones knelt in front, their white wimples framing faces that bore the serene expressions of women at peace with their chosen path. Mother Superior took her place in the center of the front row, her silver cross catching the morning light and serving as a focal point for the composition. To her right knelt Sister Bernadette, barely able to contain her excitement, while to her left was Sister Margaret, a woman of middle years whose steady presence had been a cornerstone of the community for over a decade. Behind them, the other sisters arranged themselves in careful rows, each finding her designated position with the quiet efficiency that marked all their communal activities. "Please remain perfectly still," Hartwell instructed, his head disappearing beneath the black cloth that covered his camera like a funeral shroud. "The exposure will take approximately 30 seconds. Any movement will result in blurring, so I ask that you focus on a single point and maintain your position until I signal that the process is complete." The sisters held their poses with the discipline that years of prayer and meditation had instilled in them. Some struggled to suppress nervous smiles, while others maintained the solemn expressions they wore during their most sacred ceremonies. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of autumn leaves overhead and the distant tolling of the chapel bell marking the hour. A few of the sisters found themselves thinking of family members who would never see this image, parents and siblings who had accepted their decision to enter religious life, but still wondered about the daughter or sister who had chosen God over the world. Sister Constance, standing in the back row between Sister Margaret and what appeared to be an empty space, felt a strange chill despite the warmth of the morning sun. She had positioned herself carefully according to Mr. Hartwell's directions, but something felt different about the space to her left. There was a presence there, a sense of someone standing close beside her, though when she had glanced over moments before, she had seen nothing but empty air. "Excellent," Hartwell announced, emerging from beneath his cloth after what seemed like an eternity, but had been precisely 30 seconds. "I believe we have captured a most dignified portrait of your community. The lighting was perfect, and I observed no movement among your sisters during the exposure." The photographer began the careful process of packing his equipment, while his assistant made notes about the session in a leather-bound ledger. Mother Superior approached him with questions about when the photograph would be ready, eager to see how their community had been preserved for posterity. "The plate will be developed in my studio in Boston," Hartwell explained, wrapping the exposed photographic plate in protective cloth. "I shall have prints made and delivered to you within a fortnight. I believe you will be quite pleased with the result, Mother Superior." Your sisters maintained their composure admirably throughout the process. The photograph was developed in Boston's most reputable photographic studio, where Hartwell maintained a darkroom equipped with the latest chemical processes and enlarging equipment. He took special care with the convent photograph, knowing that it would serve as an important historical record for the religious community. The development process proceeded normally, with the image gradually appearing in the chemical baths as it had countless times before. But as the image became clearer, Hartwell noticed something that made him pause in his work. There, in the back row, standing between Sister Margaret and Sister Constance, was a figure he did not remember positioning during the session. The woman wore the traditional black habit of the order, her face partially obscured by the white wimple, but her features were unfamiliar to him. More disturbing still, while every other sister in the photograph displayed the slight stiffness common to long exposures of that era, this unknown figure appeared to be in perfect focus, as if she had remained absolutely motionless throughout the entire process. Hartwell counted the figures in the photograph carefully, using a magnifying glass to ensure accuracy. 24 nuns, including Mother Superior, but he distinctly remembered counting only 23 sisters as he had arranged the composition that morning. His assistant's notes confirmed this number, and Hartwell prided himself on his attention to such details. The photographer spent the next several hours examining the photographic plate under various lighting conditions, searching for any explanation for the anomaly. Could there have been a flaw in the glass plate that had created the illusion of an additional figure? Had some trick of light and shadow combined to produce a false image? But no matter how carefully he examined the photograph, the mysterious figure remained clearly visible, as real and solid as any of the other sisters. 2 weeks later, the finished photograph was delivered to St. Catherine's Convent in a protective wooden frame, wrapped carefully in brown paper and accompanied by a letter from Mr. Hartwell. Mother Superior carefully unwrapped the large print in her office, eager to see how their community had been preserved for posterity. The afternoon light streaming through her window provided perfect illumination as she examined the image for the first time. What she saw made her pause, her brow furrowing in confusion that quickly deepened into concern. There, in the back row, standing between Sister Margaret and Sister Constance, was a figure she did not recognize. The woman wore the traditional black habit of their order, her face partially obscured by the white wimple, but her features were completely unfamiliar. More disturbing still, while every other sister in the photograph displayed expressions of quiet dignity appropriate to the solemn occasion, this unknown figure seemed to possess an otherworldly quality that set her apart from the rest of the community. Mother Superior counted the figures in the photograph with growing alarm. 24 nuns, including herself, but she knew with absolute certainty that only 23 sisters had been present that morning. She had personally taken attendance, as was her custom before any community gathering, and had watched each sister take her position for the photograph. The mysterious figure's face was pale, almost luminous, with dark eyes that seemed to stare directly at the camera, with an intensity that made Mother Superior uncomfortable. The hands, folded in the traditional prayer position, appeared strangely translucent, as if the morning light was passing through them rather than reflecting off their surface. Most unsettling of all, the figure seemed to cast no shadow, despite the clear shadows visible around all the other sisters. "Sister Bernadette," Mother Superior called, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt as she summoned the young nun who served as her assistant. "Please ask Sister Margaret and Sister Constance to come to my office immediately, and ask them to bring Sister Catherine as well. I have something that requires their attention." When the 3 sisters arrived, Mother Superior showed them the photograph without explanation, watching their faces carefully as they examined the image. Sister Margaret, a stout woman in her 40s who had been with the community for 15 years, studied the picture with growing puzzlement. "Mother Superior," she said slowly, pointing to the mysterious figure, "who is this sister standing beside me? I remember Sister Constance was to my left during the photography session, but I cannot recall anyone standing to my right. The space seemed empty." Sister Constance nodded in agreement, her face pale as she examined the photograph more closely. "I felt no presence beside me during the exposure. Surely I would have noticed if another sister had been standing so close. I remember feeling quite alone on that side, actually, which struck me as odd since we were arranged so carefully." Sister Catherine, the convent's librarian and most educated member, took the photograph and examined it through the magnifying glass that Mother Superior provided. Her scholarly mind immediately began analyzing the image for any logical explanation. "The photographic quality is remarkable," she observed, "but this figure appears to be as solid and real as any of us. This is not a trick of light or a flaw in the development process." Mother Superior examined the photograph more closely, using the magnifying glass to study every detail of the mysterious figure's appearance. The face was indeed pale, with an almost ethereal quality that seemed to glow from within. The dark eyes held a depth of sadness that spoke of great suffering, while the mouth was set in a line that suggested both determination and resignation. The hands folded in prayer were indeed translucent, and Mother Superior could make out the fabric of the habit behind them. "Has anyone in our community ever looked like this?" Mother Superior asked, though she already knew the answer. "Could this be a sister who left us recently? Someone whose departure I might have forgotten?" All 3 sisters shook their heads. Sister Catherine, who maintained the convent's records with meticulous care, was particularly certain. "Mother Superior, I have documented every woman who has entered or left this community since its founding. No one matching this description has ever been among us. Over the following days, Mother Superior questioned every sister in the community about the mysterious figure. She showed the photograph to each nun individually, asking if they recognized the face or remembered anyone standing in that position during the photography session. Not one could recall the presence of an additional nun during the session, and none recognized the face in the photograph, despite the close-knit nature of their community where every member knew every other intimately. Sister Bernadette, when shown the photograph, studied it with the intensity of youth trying to solve a puzzle. "Mother Superior," she said hesitantly, "there is something familiar about her face, but not from our community. It's as if I've seen her in a dream, or perhaps in one of the old paintings in the chapel. She has the look of someone from long ago." This observation troubled Mother Superior more than she cared to admit. The convent's chapel did indeed contain several old paintings depicting saints and martyrs, women who had suffered for their faith in centuries past. Could there be some connection between this mysterious figure and the spiritual history of their sacred space? "Perhaps it is a trick of light and shadow," suggested Sister Catherine during one of their discussions about the anomaly. "Photography is still a new science. There may be explanations we do not yet understand. I have read that certain atmospheric conditions can create unusual effects in photographic images." But Mother Superior was not convinced by rational explanations. She had spent her entire adult life in service to God, and she trusted her instincts about spiritual matters. There was something profoundly unsettling about the figure in the photograph, something that seemed to emanate a coldness that had nothing to do with the autumn morning on which it was taken. The image seemed to watch her from its frame, those dark eyes following her movements around the office with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She decided to write to Mr. Hartwell, requesting an explanation for the anomaly. Perhaps the photographer had encountered similar phenomena in his work, or could offer some technical explanation that would put her mind at ease. His response arrived a week later, delivered by a nervous-looking messenger who seemed eager to complete his task and depart quickly. "Dear Mother Superior," the letter began in Hartwell's usually steady handwriting, though Mother Superior noticed that the script seemed more hurried than usual, with several words crossed out and rewritten. "I must confess that your inquiry has caused me considerable distress and sleepless nights since receiving your letter. I have examined my equipment thoroughly and can find no mechanical explanation for the additional figure in your community photograph. The camera was functioning perfectly, and I took great care with the exposure and development process. Following procedures I have used successfully for over a decade. More disturbing still, I have reviewed my notes from that morning, and I distinctly remember counting 23 sisters as I arranged the composition. My assistant's records confirm this number, and we both pride ourselves on attention to such details. I am certain that no additional person was present during the photography session, yet the figure appears in the developed image with a clarity that suggests she was indeed there, standing among your community. I have been practicing photography for over a decade, and I have never encountered such an anomaly. I have consulted with colleagues in Boston and New York, showing them the photograph without revealing its origin, and none can offer a rational explanation. Several have suggested that there may be spiritual forces at work that are beyond my understanding or expertise. I must also confess that since developing this photograph, I have experienced disturbing dreams in which I see the mysterious figure moving through the image, changing position among your sisters. In these dreams, she turns to look directly at me, and her eyes hold a sadness so profound that I wake with tears on my cheeks. I fear that I may have somehow captured more than mere light and shadow on that autumn morning. The letter was signed with a shaking hand, and Mother Superior noticed several ink blots where the pen had trembled against the paper. A postscript, added in even more unsteady writing, contained a final disturbing detail. "I have made only the prints you requested. The original plate has been stored in my vault, but I confess I am reluctant to examine it again. There is something about that image that fills me with an inexplicable dread." As word of the mysterious photograph spread through the small religious community of Western Massachusetts, visitors began arriving at St. Catherine's Convent. Some came out of curiosity, drawn by tales of supernatural phenomena that grew more elaborate with each telling. Others sought spiritual guidance about the implications of the image, wondering if it represented a divine sign or a warning of some kind. A few claimed to be investigators of paranormal phenomena, a field that was gaining popularity in the late 19th century as spiritualism and interest in the occult flourished throughout New England. Among these visitors was Dr. William Thornfield, a professor of theology from Harvard University, who had made a study of unexplained religious phenomena throughout New England and beyond. He arrived on a grey November morning, his scholarly demeanor and respectful approach earning him an audience with Mother Superior. Dr. Thornfield was a man in his 50s with greying hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had spent years documenting cases of supernatural occurrences in religious settings, approaching each with scientific rigor while maintaining an open mind about the possibility of divine intervention in earthly affairs. "I have heard remarkable things about your photograph," he said, settling into the simple wooden chair in Mother Superior's office. The room was spartanly furnished, containing only the essentials needed for administrative work, but it possessed a peaceful atmosphere that spoke of years of prayer and contemplation. "Might I be permitted to examine it? I assure you that my interest is purely academic, and I approach such matters with the respect they deserve." Mother Superior retrieved the photograph from its protective folder, placing it carefully on her desk, where the afternoon light would provide optimal viewing conditions. Dr. Thornfield studied it through a jeweler's loupe, paying particular attention to the mysterious figure, while making careful notes in a leather-bound journal. "Fascinating," he murmured, adjusting the magnification to examine different aspects of the image. "The image quality is remarkably clear for a figure that supposedly was not present during the exposure. Notice how the light falls upon her habit in exactly the same manner as the other sisters. The shadows are consistent, the focus is perfect. This is not a double exposure or a photographic error." He looked up at Mother Superior, his expression grave. "The figure appears to be as real and solid as any other person in the photograph, yet you maintain that no such individual was present during the session. This presents us with a most intriguing paradox." "Dr. Thornfield," Mother Superior said carefully, "in your studies of such phenomena, have you encountered similar cases? Are there documented instances of figures appearing in photographs when they were not present during the exposure?" The professor leaned back in his chair, considering his response. "There have been a few reported cases, though most can be explained by technical errors or deliberate manipulation. However, there are a handful of instances that defy rational explanation. In each case, the mysterious figures have been associated with locations that have experienced tragedy or injustice, particularly involving individuals who died under circumstances that left their earthly affairs unresolved." He paused, studying Mother Superior's face carefully. "Have there been any other unusual occurrences in the convent since this photograph was taken? Sometimes such manifestations are accompanied by other phenomena." Mother Superior hesitated before answering, reluctant to admit to the strange events that had been troubling her community. "There have been incidents. Sisters reporting the sound of footsteps in empty corridors during the night hours when all should be asleep. Doors opening and closing without explanation, particularly in the older sections of the building. Several of our novices have complained of feeling watched during their private prayers, as if unseen eyes were observing their most intimate moments with God." "And the chapel?" Dr. Thornfield asked, making more notes. "Any disturbances during services or private devotions?" "Yesterday morning during Lauds, Sister Bernadette fainted during the reading of the Psalms. When she recovered, she claimed to have seen a figure standing at the altar, a woman in our habit who gestured for her to approach. But when Sister Bernadette looked again, no one was there. She described the figure as having the same pale, luminous quality as the woman in our photograph." Dr. Thornfield made careful notes in his journal, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "Mother Superior, based on what you have told me and what I observe in this photograph, I believe you may be dealing with what theologians call a spiritual manifestation. The figure in your photograph may be the soul of someone with a strong connection to your community or to this location, someone who has passed beyond the veil but remains tied to this earthly place by unresolved matters." "But who could it be?" Mother Superior asked, voicing the question that had tormented her for weeks. "Our records are meticulous. Every sister who has lived and died in this community is accounted for. We have detailed documentation of every woman who has taken vows here since our founding 50 years ago. Perhaps, Dr. Thornfield suggested, leaning forward with interest, the answer lies not in your recent records but in the history of the land itself. Has this property always been a convent? What was here before St. Catherine's was established? Mother Superior shook her head slowly. St. Catherine's was established 50 years ago on land that was purchased from a local farming family, but the property has a much older history. According to local records, there was a small settlement here in the early 1800s, before the area was developed for religious purposes. I confess I have never researched that earlier period in great detail. I would strongly recommend investigating that history, Dr. Thornfield advised, his tone suggesting the urgency he felt about the matter. Often, spiritual manifestations are connected to unresolved earthly matters, particularly those involving tragedy or injustice. If someone died on this land under circumstances that left their soul unable to find peace, they might be drawn to manifest when the location is again used for sacred purposes. After Dr. Thornfield's departure, Mother Superior found herself unable to concentrate on her usual administrative duties. The professor's words had planted a seed of concern that grew with each passing hour. If the mysterious figure in their photograph was indeed the spirit of someone connected to the land's earlier history, what did that mean for her community? Were they sharing their sacred space with a restless soul? And if so, what obligations did that create for them as Christians? She decided to begin her own investigation into the property's past, despite the considerable effort such research would require. The following morning, she arranged for Sister Catherine to manage the convent's daily operations, while she traveled to the county courthouse in nearby Springfield. The journey took most of the day, traveling by wagon over roads that were little more than dirt tracks through the autumn countryside. The courthouse was the imposing brick building that housed decades of local records, from land deeds and census data to court proceedings and newspaper archives. Mother Superior spent long hours in the dusty records room, poring over documents that chronicled the area's history from its earliest settlement through the present day. The work was tedious and often frustrating, as many of the older records were poorly organized and difficult to read. What she discovered in those yellowed pages sent a chill through her soul that had nothing to do with the cold November air seeping through the courthouse windows. In 1823, the land that would eventually become St. Catherine's Convent had been home to a small farming community called Millbrook Settlement. The community had been founded by a group of religious families seeking to live simply and in harmony with God's will, not unlike the monastic communities that would later flourish throughout New England. The settlement had consisted of about 30 families, mostly farmers and craftsmen, who had come west from the more established communities along the coast. Among the founding families was that of Jeremiah and Patience Blackwood, devout Puritans who had brought their daughter Mercy west from Salem. According to the census records, Mercy Blackwood had been 19 years old in 1823, the same age as Sister Bernadette, and the sparse records available suggested that she had been known throughout the settlement for her piety and dedication to prayer and good works. But the records also revealed a darker truth that made Mother Superior's hands tremble as she read. In the winter of 1824, Mercy Blackwood had been accused of witchcraft by several members of the Millbrook settlement. The accusations had stemmed from a series of unexplained events that had plagued the community: livestock falling ill without apparent cause, crops failing despite favorable weather conditions, and several children in the settlement reporting nightmares about a dark figure watching them from the forest that surrounded their homes. The accusations against Mercy had been led by the settlement's minister, Reverend Ezekiel Morse, a man whose religious fervor apparently bordered on fanaticism. According to court records that Mother Superior found in a separate file, Reverend Morse had claimed to have witnessed Mercy performing unholy rituals in the woods surrounding the community, though the details of these alleged rituals were vague and seemed to change with each telling. Despite her protests of innocence and her family's desperate attempts to defend her, Mercy had been tried by the community's religious council and found guilty of consorting with dark forces. The trial records, written in the careful script of a court clerk, painted a picture of a community consumed by fear and superstition, willing to sacrifice one of their own to explain the misfortunes that had befallen them. The records of Mercy's execution were brief and clinical, but they contained details that made Mother Superior's blood run cold. On February 14, 1824, Mercy Blackwood had been hanged from an oak tree that stood in what was now the convent's courtyard, the very spot where the sisters had posed for their commemorative photograph. The execution had taken place at dawn, with most of the settlement's population in attendance to witness what they believed was the removal of evil from their midst. But the most chilling detail was yet to come. According to a witness account preserved in the courthouse files, Mercy's final words before her execution had been a solemn vow that echoed through the morning air with such conviction that several witnesses later claimed they could never forget the sound of her voice. "I am innocent before God, and I shall return to prove my righteousness when this place is again consecrated to His service." Mother Superior sat in the dim courthouse reading room as the afternoon light faded, the weight of this discovery pressing upon her like a physical burden. Mercy Blackwood had died on the exact spot where the convent now stood, executed for crimes she may never have committed, and she had promised to return when the land was again used for religious purposes. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. St. Catherine's Convent had been established exactly 50 years after Mercy's death, and the mysterious figure had appeared in their photograph on the 50th anniversary of the convent's founding. It was as if Mercy had been waiting, watching, for the right moment to make her presence known to those who now occupied the sacred ground where her innocent blood had been spilled. Further research revealed additional disturbing details about the aftermath of Mercy's execution. The Millbrook settlement had not prospered after her death. Within 5 years, most of the families had abandoned their farms and moved elsewhere, driven away by continued misfortunes that some attributed to a curse upon the land. The remaining families had struggled on for another decade before finally giving up and selling their property to land speculators who had allowed it to return to wilderness. Mother Superior also discovered records of several attempts to establish other communities on the land over the intervening years. A group of Shaker families had tried to build a settlement there in the 1840s, but had abandoned the effort after reporting strange occurrences and an oppressive atmosphere that made worship difficult. A small Methodist congregation had built a church on the property in the 1850s, but it had burned down under mysterious circumstances within 2 years of its construction. It seemed that every attempt to use the land for religious purposes had failed, until the Catholic Church had purchased the property and established St. Catherine's Convent in 1837. The fact that their community had thrived for 50 years suggested that perhaps Mercy's spirit had been waiting for the right kind of religious presence, one that might be willing to acknowledge her innocence and help her find the peace that had been denied her in life. Mother Superior returned to the convent that evening with a heavy heart, the historical documents tucked safely in her traveling bag. The journey back seemed longer than usual, as if the very landscape was weighted with the tragic history she had uncovered. She found the community in a state of quiet agitation, with several sisters reporting additional supernatural occurrences during her absence. Sister Bernadette met her at the entrance, her young face pale with worry and exhaustion. "Mother Superior, thank God you've returned," she said, wringing her hands nervously. "There have been more incidents." Sister Margaret heard singing in the chapel during the night, but when she investigated with Sister Catherine, they found it empty. The song was beautiful, but sad, like a lament for the dead. "What kind of singing?" Mother Superior asked, noting every detail. "Hymns? Prayers?" Sister Margaret said it was unlike anything she had heard before. Not Latin, not English, but something older. The melody was haunting, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When they entered the chapel, the singing stopped immediately, but they both felt a presence there watching them from the shadows. Sister Bernadette continued her report as they walked through the convent corridors, and Sister Constance swears she saw a figure in white walking through the garden just after sunset, not in our traditional black habit, but a simple white dress like those worn by young women in the countryside. "In white?" Mother Superior asked, noting this significant detail. "Not in our traditional black habit?" "Yes, Mother Superior." She described it as a simple white dress with long sleeves and a high collar, the kind that unmarried young women wore in the early part of the century. The figure seemed to be searching for something, walking back and forth among the vegetable plots as if looking for something that had been lost or hidden. Mother Superior nodded grimly. The description matched what she had learned about Mercy Blackwood, who would have worn simple white clothing as an unmarried young woman in the early 1800s. It seemed that Mercy was not content to appear only in photographs. She was making her presence felt throughout the convent grounds, perhaps growing stronger as the anniversary of her death approached. "There's more, Mother Superior," Sister Bernadette continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Sister Constance said that when the figure in white noticed her watching from the window, it stopped walking and turned to look directly at her. She said the face was pale and sad, with dark eyes that seemed to hold decades of sorrow. The figure raised one hand as if in greeting, then simply faded away like morning mist. That night, Mother Superior knelt in her private chapel, seeking guidance through prayer about how to handle the supernatural crisis that seemed to be engulfing her community. The small room was illuminated only by a single candle, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the stone walls that had witnessed decades of prayer and contemplation. As she prayed for wisdom and protection for her sisters, she became aware of a subtle change in the atmosphere around her. The air grew colder, despite the warmth of the October evening, and the candle flame began to waver despite the absence of any draught. Mother Superior continued her prayers, but she could not shake the feeling that she was no longer alone in the chapel. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with each passing moment, until she could no longer ignore the presence that seemed to fill the small space. When she finally opened her eyes and looked up from her prayer book, her breath caught in her throat. Standing before the simple wooden altar was the figure from the photograph, but now she appeared in living form, rather than as a static image. Mercy Blackwood stood exactly as she had in the mysterious photograph, pale, luminous, wearing the black habit of the convent, but with an otherworldly quality that made her seem both present and absent simultaneously. "For you know who I am," Mercy said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of silence and suffering. The sound was soft but clear, with an accent that spoke of an earlier era when language was more formal and measured. "You have learned the truth of my death and the injustice that was done on this sacred ground." Mother Superior found her voice, though it trembled with a mixture of fear and compassion. "Mercy Blackwood, you were wrongly accused, wrongly executed on this land that is now consecrated to God's service." "I was innocent," Mercy replied, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight with an intensity that seemed to burn from within. "I lived a life of prayer and devotion, seeking only to serve God and help my neighbors in their times of need. Yet I was condemned by those who claimed to serve the same Lord I worshipped. I died with his name on my lips and his forgiveness in my heart, even for those who wronged me." "What do you want from us?" Mother Superior asked gently, her pastoral instincts overcoming her fear. "Why have you chosen to reveal yourself now, after so many years of silence?" Mercy's form seemed to shimmer, becoming more translucent as she spoke, as if the effort of manifesting in physical form was draining her spiritual energy. "For 63 years I have wandered this place, unable to find peace. My soul remains bound to the earth where my innocent blood was spilled, where my body was buried in unconsecrated ground, like a criminal rather than a faithful Christian. But when your community was established here, when this land was again consecrated to God's service, I felt hope for the first time since my death." "Hope for what?" Mother Superior asked, leaning forward in her desire to understand. "For vindication, for the truth to be known, for my name to be cleared so that my soul might finally rest in the peace that Christ promises to all who believe in him." Mercy stepped closer, and Mother Superior could feel the supernatural cold that emanated from her presence, a chill that seemed to penetrate not just her body but her very soul. "You have the power to help me, Mother Superior. Your community, built upon the very ground where I suffered, can be the instrument of my redemption." Mother Superior considered the Spirit's words carefully, weighing them against her theological training and her understanding of Christian doctrine. "What would you have us do? How can we help you find the peace you seek? Tell my story. Let the truth be known. Hold a service of remembrance for an innocent soul wrongly condemned. Acknowledge that this sacred ground was once defiled by injustice and consecrate it anew with prayers for the dead." Mercy's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if the very act of voicing her request was giving her hope. "I do not ask for vengeance against those who wronged me, for they have long since faced God's judgment. I ask only for acknowledgement of my innocence and prayers for my soul's rest. The request seemed reasonable, even righteous. Mother Superior had spent her life fighting against injustice and serving those who had been wronged by the world. If Mercy Blackwood had indeed been innocent, then she deserved to have her name cleared and her soul given the peace that had been denied her for over 6 decades. "I will consider your request," Mother Superior said carefully, "but I must pray for guidance and consult with my sisters. Such a decision affects our entire community, and I cannot make it alone." Mercy nodded, her form beginning to fade as the candle flame steadied and the supernatural cold lifted from the chapel. "I have waited 63 years. I can wait a little longer. But know this, Mother Superior, until justice is done, I cannot rest. And a restless soul can bring great disturbance to even the most sacred places. I do not wish to frighten your sisters or disrupt your holy work, but my presence will continue to be felt until my earthly business is concluded." With those words, Mercy Blackwood vanished, leaving Mother Superior alone in the chapel with only the flickering candle and the lingering scent of winter air that seemed to carry with it the memory of a February morning long past, when an innocent woman had died for crimes she never committed. The following morning, Mother Superior called a meeting of the entire community in the chapter house, the large room where the sisters gathered for important discussions and decisions that affected their shared life. She shared what she had learned about Mercy Blackwood's tragic history and her encounter with the spirit in the chapel the previous night. The revelation was met with a mixture of fear, sympathy, and theological debate among the sisters, each responding according to her own understanding of spiritual matters and church doctrine. Sister Catherine, ever the scholar, raised important questions about the spiritual implications of their situation. If we acknowledge this spirit and perform the requested service, are we not opening ourselves to further supernatural influences? The Church teaches us to be cautious about such matters, to test the spirits, to ensure they come from God rather than from darker sources. Sister Margaret, practical as always, worried about the community's reputation and standing within the broader Catholic Church. "What will the diocese say if word spreads that we are conducting services for ghosts? Our standing in the Church could be compromised, and we might face investigation or even closure if the bishop believes we are engaging in practices that border on spiritualism or occultism." But young Sister Bernadette, who had been most affected by the supernatural occurrences, spoke with surprising wisdom that belied her 19 years. "Sisters, if this woman was truly innocent, if she was wrongly killed on our sacred ground, then do we not have a Christian duty to help her find peace? Is not mercy one of our highest callings? Did not Christ himself minister to the outcasts and the wrongly condemned?" Sister Constance, who had seen the figure in white walking through the garden, added her own perspective. "I felt no evil in the presence I witnessed. There was sadness, yes, and a deep longing for something that had been denied, but no malice or darkness. If this spirit means us harm, why has she not acted against us? Why does she appear in our habit, as if seeking to join our community rather than destroy it?" The debate continued for hours, with sisters citing scripture, church doctrine, and their own spiritual experiences. Some argued that any contact with spirits was dangerous and potentially heretical, while others maintained that Christian charity demanded they help a soul in torment, regardless of her earthly state. Mother Superior listened carefully to all perspectives, weighing the theological implications against her own sense of justice and compassion. Sister Mary Catherine, the eldest member of their community at 72 years of age, finally spoke with the authority that came from decades of religious life. "In my years of service to God, I have learned that His mercy extends far beyond our human understanding. If this soul has been wronged, if she seeks only justice and peace, then perhaps God has chosen our community to be the instrument of His divine mercy. We should not fear to do what is right simply because it is unusual or unprecedented." Finally, after much prayer and discussion, Mother Superior made her decision. "We will hold a service of remembrance for Mercy Blackwood, not as a supernatural ritual or an attempt to commune with spirits, but as a Christian act of mercy for an innocent soul who was denied justice in life. We will pray for her peace and ask God's forgiveness for the injustice that was done on this ground." The service was scheduled for the following Sunday, exactly 1 week after Mother Superior's encounter with Mercy's spirit. Word of the unusual ceremony spread through the local community, despite the sisters' attempts to keep the matter private, and several townspeople requested permission to attend. Dr. Thornfield returned from Harvard, bringing with him 2 colleagues who were interested in documenting the proceedings for their own research into religious phenomena. As Sunday morning dawned, the chapel of St. Catherine's Convent was filled to capacity for the first time in its 50-year history. The sisters occupied their usual places in the front pews, their faces reflecting a mixture of solemnity and anticipation. Behind them, visitors filled the remaining seats. Local farmers and their families, scholars from nearby colleges, and even a few newspaper reporters who had heard rumors of the supernatural events at the convent. Mother Superior had prepared a careful sermon that balanced respect for the dead with orthodox Christian theology, drawing upon scripture and church tradition to justify their unusual service. She wore her finest vestments for the occasion, and the altar had been decorated with white flowers that symbolized innocence and purity. "We gather today," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed chapel, "not to commune with spirits or engage in supernatural practices, but to acknowledge a grave injustice and to pray for the peace of an innocent soul." Mercy Blackwood was a young woman of faith who died wrongly accused and condemned by those who should have protected her. As Christians, we are called to seek justice for the oppressed and mercy for the suffering, even when that suffering occurred long before our time. The service proceeded with traditional hymns and prayers, but as Mother Superior reached the climax of her sermon, a profound change came over the chapel. The temperature dropped noticeably, causing several visitors to pull their coats more tightly around themselves. The candles on the altar began to flicker despite the still air, and a soft, ethereal light began to emanate from the area around the altar, growing brighter as Mother Superior spoke. "Mercy Blackwood," Mother Superior continued, her voice growing stronger as she felt the spiritual presence filling the sacred space. "If your spirit lingers in this place, know that your innocence is acknowledged, your suffering is recognized, and your faith is honored. May God grant you the peace that was denied you in life, and may your soul find rest in His eternal love." As these words were spoken, the light at the altar intensified, and for a brief moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, every person in the chapel could see the figure of a young woman in white standing before the cross. Her face was serene, no longer bearing the anguish and sorrow that had marked her previous appearances in the convent. She raised her hand in a gesture of blessing toward the assembled congregation, her lips moving in what appeared to be words of gratitude, though no sound could be heard. Then, slowly and peacefully, she faded from view, the supernatural light dimming until only the natural illumination of the chapel remained. The supernatural cold lifted from the sacred space, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the building, as if the structure itself had been blessed and purified by the ceremony. Several of the sisters later reported feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and divine presence during those final moments of the service, a sensation of spiritual completion that suggested their prayers had been heard and answered. Even the skeptical visitors seemed moved by what they had witnessed, with several later writing accounts of the experience that would be preserved in academic journals and newspaper articles. In the days that followed the memorial service, the strange occurrences that had plagued St. Catherine's Convent ceased entirely. No more unexplained footsteps echoed through the corridors during the night hours, no more doors opened and closed of their own accord, and no more mysterious figures were seen walking through the gardens or standing in the chapel. It seemed that Mercy Blackwood had finally found the peace she had sought for over 6 decades. Dr. Thornfield documented the entire experience in a detailed report that would later be published in the Journal of Theological Studies, making it one of the most widely cited cases of spiritual intervention in academic literature. His account of the service and its apparent supernatural resolution became required reading for students of religious phenomena at several universities throughout New England. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the entire affair was what happened to the original photograph that had started the investigation. On the Monday morning following the memorial service, Mother Superior retrieved the image from her office safe to show to a visiting bishop who had come to investigate the unusual events that had been reported in the Catholic press. When she opened the protective folder, she gasped in amazement at what she saw. The mysterious figure that had appeared between Sister Margaret and Sister Constance was no longer there. The photograph now showed exactly 23 nuns, the correct number who had been present during the original session with Mr. Hartwell in October. It was as if Mercy Blackwood had never appeared in the image at all, as if her spiritual presence had been completely erased from the photographic record once her earthly business was concluded. The only evidence of her supernatural appearance was the testimony of those who had seen the original photograph and the detailed notes that Mother Superior had kept throughout the ordeal. The photograph was examined by several experts, including photographers and scientists from Boston and New York, who had heard about the unusual case. None could explain how a figure could disappear from a developed photographic plate, leaving no trace of alteration or manipulation. The image appeared to be completely authentic, showing no signs of tampering or chemical interference that might account for the change. Mr. Hartwell himself was summoned to examine the photograph, and his reaction was one of complete bewilderment. "This is impossible," he declared after studying the image through multiple magnifying devices. "I have the original plate in my vault in Boston, and it clearly shows 24 figures. Yet this print made from that same plate shows only 23. There is no scientific explanation for such a phenomenon." Mother Superior kept the photograph in her office for the remainder of her tenure as head of the convent, using it as a reminder of the mysterious ways in which divine justice could manifest in the world. She often reflected on the lesson that Mercy Blackwood's story had taught her community, that the innocent dead deserve remembrance, and that sometimes the living must serve as instruments of heavenly mercy. Years later, when Mother Superior was nearing the end of her own earthly journey, she would tell visitors that the Mercy Blackwood incident had been the most profound spiritual experience of her long religious life. It had taught her that the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was far thinner than most people realized, and that God's justice could work through the most unexpected channels to right ancient wrongs. The convent continued to thrive for many decades after the mysterious events of 1887, with the sisters who had witnessed Mercy's appearance and the supernatural resolution of her story passing down the account to new generations of nuns. The memorial service for Mercy Blackwood became an annual tradition at St. Catherine's, held every year on the anniversary of her wrongful execution, ensuring that her story would not be forgotten and that her innocence would be remembered by future generations. But the story of the mysterious photograph had several additional chapters that would not be revealed until many years later, each adding new layers to the already complex tale of spiritual justice and divine intervention. In 1943, during renovations to the convent's foundation that were necessitated by settling in the old stone walls, workers discovered a small wooden box buried beneath the chapel floor, directly under the spot where the altar stood. The box was made of oak and bound with iron, its surface carved with symbols that none of the sisters could identify. Inside the box were personal items that had belonged to Mercy Blackwood: a simple silver cross, a handwritten prayer book, and a letter addressed to whoever finds these belongings. The letter, written in Mercy's own hand shortly before her execution, contained her final testimony of innocence and her prophetic words about returning to prove her righteousness. But most remarkably, the letter also contained a detailed description of a vision she had experienced while awaiting her death in the crude jail that the Millbrook settlement had constructed for her confinement. "I have seen in my dreams," the letter read in Mercy's careful script, "a community of holy women who will one day serve God on this very ground where I am to die. I have seen them gather for a sacred image to be made, and I have seen myself standing among them, no longer as an outcast, but as a sister in faith. This vision gives me comfort in my final hours, for I know that God's justice will ultimately prevail, even if it takes many years to manifest." The discovery of this letter provided the final confirmation of Mercy Blackwood's innocence and the supernatural nature of her appearance in the 1887 photograph. It also revealed that her manifestation had not been a random haunting, but rather the fulfillment of a divine vision that had sustained her through her darkest hours. The letter suggested that God had shown her the future, allowing her to see that justice would eventually come through the very community that would be established on the site of her suffering. Mother Superior Agatha, now elderly but still sharp of mind, read the letter with tears in her eyes. She realized that she and her sisters had been part of a plan that transcended human understanding, chosen to serve as instruments of justice for a soul that had waited patiently for over 60 years to be vindicated. The discovery also explained why Mercy had appeared in their habit rather than in the simple white dress of her earthly life. She had seen herself as part of their community even before it existed. The letter was carefully preserved in the convent's archives, along with detailed accounts of all the supernatural events that had occurred in 1887. These documents would later be studied by theologians, historians, and paranormal researchers, making St. Catherine's Convent famous throughout New England as a place where the impossible had become reality through the power of faith and divine justice. But for the sisters who lived and worked there, the most important legacy of Mercy Blackwood's story was not its supernatural aspects, but its profound lesson about justice, mercy, and the power of faith to transcend even death itself. They had learned that sometimes the dead speak to the living, not to frighten or disturb, but to seek the justice and peace that were denied them in life. The photograph that had started it all remained in the convent's collection, now showing only the 23 sisters who had actually been present on that autumn morning in 1887. But those who knew the full story understood that the empty space where Mercy had once appeared was not truly empty at all. It was filled with the invisible presence of divine justice, a reminder that God's mercy extends beyond the grave and that the innocent dead are never truly forgotten. In the end, the mystery of the nun who never existed had revealed a deeper truth, that existence itself is more complex and wonderful than most people dare to imagine, and that love, justice, and faith can bridge even the vast gulf between life and death. Mercy Blackwood had found her peace at last, but her story continued to inspire all who heard it to believe in the possibility of redemption, even in the darkest circumstances. The tale of St. Catherine's Convent and its mysterious photograph became one of the most well-documented cases of supernatural intervention in American religious history. It stands as a testament to the power of faith to heal old wounds and the importance of seeking justice for those who have been wronged, no matter how much time has passed since their suffering began. And somewhere in the peaceful grounds of the convent, where autumn leaves still fall each year in golden carpets, the spirit of Mercy Blackwood rests at last, her innocence acknowledged, her faith vindicated, and her soul finally free to join the eternal community of saints she had always been destined to serve.